Hello. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today and joining us for this conversation about drugs and criminal justice, the situation in Latin America and Spain. First of all, let me say a few words in Spanish for people who are streaming with us. Muchas gracias por uniros a la conversación hoy. Este evento está organizado por una RIOD, la Red Iberoamericana de ONGs que trabajan en drogas y adicciones, con el apoyo de España, en particular la Delegación del Gobierno para el Plan Nacional sobre Drogas e Instituciones Penitenciarias, CICAD-OEA, DEJUSTICIA, ACEID y RIMUF. This event is organized by UNAD and RIOD, the Red Iberoamericana de ONGs que trabajan en drogas y adicciones, with the support of Spain, in particular delegation of the Plan Nacional sobre Drogas, CICAD-OEA, DEJUSTICIA, ACEID y RIMUF. Please let me thank you all for being here today. In the next hours, we will have 3 distinguished speakers with us, and there will be time for a short Q&A session afterwards. So, without further delay, let me introduce our first speaker today, Pedro Quesada. He's a lawyer specialized in criminal and penitentiary law, coordinator on the Commission of Restorative Justice in Federación Enlace, coordinator on International Drug Policies Commission in UNAD, and member of the UNAD Commission of Addictions and Criminal Justice, and member of the steering committee, representative of Federación Enlace on behalf of the Civil Society on Drugs of the European Commission. Pedro, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Isela, for the presentation. I would like to, first of all, give thanks to the CND for giving us this opportunity. Obviously, give you all thank you for coming and to be with us in this room, and all those who are following us through streaming. To start with, I would like to say that I am here representing UNAD, which is an umbrella entity representing itself another 200 entities working in the drugs fields: prevention, harm reduction, social inclusion, research, etc. Today, I would like to give you a short, brief overview of the situation of people with addictions in prison. Obviously, the limited time we have makes it impossible to give you detailed information, but nevertheless, you have the possibility to access to our complete report in an English version through our website or the queue that Lola is sharing with all of you. Okay. These conclusions we are about to discuss are the result of 2 years' work of UNAD, together with the Basque Country University, and with the support of the Spanish government through the penitentiary institutions and the Catalonian government. We could explore about 1,086 people, from which 839 were men and 247 women, in 18 penitentiaries, 14 penitentiaries in the Spanish territory, and 4 penitentiaries in the Catalonian territory. I must distinguish Spanish territory and Catalonian territory because Catalonia is the only region, or was the only region, to have the competencies in penitentiary policy. Well, let's start with a description of the profile of men and women in prison with addictions. First of all, we found about 75% of people of nationality, Spanish nationality. We found another 25% of other nationalities, from which we could speak about Moroccan, 9%, Romanians, Dominicans, and people from Colombia. If we refer to the ethnic groups, we found about 55% of white and Caucasians, and other ethnic groups like Romans, Gypsies, about 13%, and in a lower percentage, we found Latin Americans, Berbers, and Arabians. Regarding the academic education, we didn't find many significant differences between men and women, but we have about 35% of people with elementary education, primary education, I mean, and another 29 people with secondary education. Regarding their sexual orientation, we found about 94% of heterosexuals, 4% of bisexuals, and 2% of homosexuals. Here I must say that women are more open-minded to declare another options, different options than the heterosexual one. For example, we found about 16% of women declaring bisexuals. Family status, very important. Most of them come from, people with addictions. I must remark that all the people we have explored are people with addictions in prison. Most of them come from large families without education, without academic education, without social resources. And well, once more, we can see that these people come from a very vulnerable environment. 60% of these people have children, and 48 have as well a partner. Economy and work status. We found, for us, it had dramatic data. Only 40% of the people before coming in prison had a work. Differences between men and women. Men normally came from a regular work status. Instead of that, women came from normally underground economy. Regarding the crime and penitentiary details, we have focused our study to try to give more force to the alternative measures instead of imprisonment. For example, through the restorative justice, probation, and another options, possibilities to avoid imprisonment, assuming a treatment, the exchange of the treatment instead of getting in prison. Housing options, also a big problem for these people with addictions. We found 88% of people with a housing option, obviously, but what worried us was to find 11% of people that have no option once they will leave prison. In the case of women, again, this figure goes up to 16%. People with housing option, normally 40% of these people will go back to their family home, and there is a second option of people that have a property their own on or a rental. Health in prison is a really very important issue. Most of people we have explored, we have survived, state that imprisonment supposed a lot of psychology problems. Anxiety, claustrophobia, depression, anxiety attacks, aggressiveness, mental imbalance, revenge feelings, and even suicide attempts. Main difference between men and women is the anxiety. Remains in the anxiety. Most of women suffer this pathology, anxiety and anxiety attacks, but men not so much. 73 in the case of women, 50% in the case of men. 25% of all this population, all these people with addictions in prison, are diagnosed pathology. And we found more women with this sort of mental health issues than men. Men normally are diagnosed of schizophrenia and depression, and women normally are diagnosed of depression and anxiety. 60% of this population didn't receive a treatment inside prison. 45 of them even never visited a psychologist or the psychiatrist. they only receive a lot of pills treatment instead. This is a big problem. I finally must say that 40% of the population we consulted declared that the health system in prison is not a very good system, not very good. And 25% of people declared it is okay, a good service. Violence. We need to know some of the past of the people to understand why they are in prison. In the case of people with addictions, we found that 75% of women have suffered violence in their lives. 36% in the case of men. If we refer to sexual violence, then 45% of women declare to have suffered this sort of violence, sexual violence, 6% in the case of men. On the other hand, I must say that personally think that these figures are a bit not. I would say that they should be higher because it is very difficult in this environment with someone you don't know to declare easily that you have suffered this sort of violence. It comes from your partner or your family or whatever. So I would keep it in quarantine. Finally, we have from UNAD proposals, very important proposals. First of the proposal to try to solve all these questions would be to give priority to the open penitentiary service system. The possibility to execute the resolutions in the community, in the open community, not in prison, for most of them. I mean, people with addictions. There is, secondly, an urgent need of sanitary professionals. Drugs, addictions should be treated in the same way inside and outside prison. Otherwise, we will not end with the problem with addictions, and we will not end with the problem of crimes in the future. Third, more dialogue, less violence, very important, inside prison. And fourth and last, to include a real gender perspective in the penitentiary policy. I tried to summarize the study of UNAD. I know this is not very big, but you have the opportunity to visit our complete report in the website, as I said at the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pedro. You just nailed your 10 minutes. We really want to welcome to Camilo Eduardo Umaña Hernandez for the Feminista Política Criminal y Justicia. Thank you for joining the conversation. Feel free to add or intervene whatever you want. Our second speaker, let me introduce Isabel Pereira. She's a political scientist from the University of the Andes in Colombia, and Master in Development Studies with emphasis on conflict and peace building from the Institute of Higher International and Development Studies of Switzerland. His focus is on the impact of drug policy on women, rural development, public health, and armed conflict. She's currently the senior coordinator for the drug policy line, where she has focused on research on access to control medications for palliative care and drug dependence, implications of the peace process on drug policies in Colombia, and differentiated gender impact of provision. Welcome, for yours.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good afternoon now. Such long days. I'm happy to see a packed room. It's noon in Colombia this morning. So I will be presenting research that was carried out by actual colleagues that are here, like Bean. So we say hi to Bean, to Ernesto. All the research that was carried out by Luis Felipe, colleagues from the Americas. Our organization where we work in Colombia is the Human Rights Center for Legal Studies, with many other areas of work, and one of which is drug policy. But also we've joined this group that is called CED, Colectivo Estudios Drogas y Derecho, a consortium of studies for drugs and the law, and it's a group of researchers across the Americas that cover 11 countries and have been studying the impact of criminal policy with regards to drug offenses in the region, presenting studies on what are the trends. So a caveat is that the information that I will be presenting today is not from recent studies. It's actually from some of the studies have been performed like 10 years ago. But since the trends are more or less the same, you can imagine that even if the numbers are not correct, the trends of what we are having in terms of criminal policy in the region are very sadly the same. So the focus will be on what are the main features of our criminal policy and what are the impacts of this situation to human rights in the region. The main central elements are that we have characterized 5 elements to criminal policy regarding drugs. So the first is that we punish everything through criminal law. We don't have any other approaches to relate to drug offenses. We always use criminal law to sanction these offenses. The second aspect of our criminal policy is that it's an expansive criminalization. So you can see it growing and growing, both in terms of the sanction of the penalties and the types of conducts that are being criminalized. So that's why we call it an expansive criminalization, a wider array of conducts and verbs, and also a higher number of minimum sanctions across the years. Thirdly, it's a very undifferentiated criminalization. So basically, the criminal system treats everyone with the same sanctions, even if you are not really involved in the criminal enterprise, you don't really know how the criminal enterprise works, you get treated the same way as if you were part of the criminal organization. Fourth, we have an overuse and misuse of pretrial detention. I will go into detail further about this, but in most countries there is mandatory pretrial detention for drug offenses, and this drives, of course, incarceration rates. And lastly, most drug offenses, and in most countries, are excluded from benefits. House arrest or other benefits that can be applied to different crimes are not applied to drug offenses across the Americas in general. So this is an example of what I was mentioning, and this comes from the book, for who's interested. I have some copies here. So as I said, this is quite old, 10 years, it was done 10 years ago, but the rates still are more or less the same. So you can see in the 1950s, we have a small number of what we call verbos rectores, which are basically the activity that was sanctioned. So to have, to carry, to have with you, to possess, the types of those verbs that were criminalized in our criminal codes started to get increasing, and as you see the trend, it's doubled, tripled, or even 4 times what it was in the 50s. Next. And then also this expansive criminalization can be shown through what was the minimum sanction throughout the years. So you can see that in some cases, the minimum penalty for drug offenses has doubled or tripled over the course of 50 years. This study was done for seven Latin American countries, but some countries came later, like the and then, as I was mentioning, there is this exclusion from alternatives to incarceration. In the case of Mexico, pretrial detention has to be given automatically for drug offenses. So anyone who is caught related to drug offenses automatically going to prison. And in Peru, the constitution states that you have to be taken to a station and stay there for up to 15 days. So we can see this overuse of criminal detention. Then there's this issue of the thresholds, which is very particular to Latin American region. So basically the thresholds are that we have within our regulations that personal use is protected in some cases with regards to the quantity that you're carrying. In the case of Mexico, it is 5 grams. In the case of Ecuador, it's 10 grams. In the case of Colombia, it's 20 grams. And while that can seem like a positive, it can also lead to numerous interpretations, both from the courts and from the police itself. At least 2 trends that we see often. From the police is that if they see you with less or with something within the threshold, they'll plant you with more so that they can prosecute you. And in the case of judges, when they see you with a bit more, it's automatic an intention to distribute and automatically processed as if you were this big narco boss, which is of course not the case. And then we go to the impacts of criminalization. So yes, in Latin America, the rates of prison overcrowding and how the prison population has grown above and beyond the rates of general growth of the general population. So you can see the cases of Brazil, which are the most grave, and the cases of Colombia as well. And this goes to show how all of these trends of criminalization are impacting the prison system. In the prison system, the issue is that very much like my colleague was presenting before, it's this kind of populations that are in prison with low levels of education, that have very poor support networks around them, and that were employed or gaining a life through the informal economy, but not part of economic life. So they were involved in low-level trades and then got involved in low-level drug trades to support their families. Then we have some data about the levels of education. Of course, you can see all in this report that I will show you in a bit. And this comes across both men and women, but in the cases of women, we have seen more prevalent cases of the prison population growing at a faster rate, first. And secondly, very similar to what my colleague was presenting, that they come with a background of gender-based violence experiences before coming into prison system. And then as a result, we have a prison system that is to its limit. In the case of Colombia, it is very concrete. The Constitutional Court has stated twice that there is a state of unconstitutional affairs in our prison system due to this expensive criminalization, but also to the poor conditions within the prison. So overcrowding and a general violation of human rights is the general rule in prisons. And this came across very evidently during the pandemic, with some severe consequences to people who were in prison, their families, and their nephews. In many countries, the visits were suspended. But you have to remember that the people visiting their family members in prison is the one who provides basic health products, basic living products. So when this contact with the outside world was cut off, you were cutting off just the essential services that they needed. In some countries in Latin America, there were protests within the prisons to demand release and to demand that there was attention to the COVID pandemic and to be able to contain the pandemic within prisons. And in some countries, these protests were met with police brutality or the prison guards' brutality. In the case of Ecuador, around 40, I don't remember the exact total number, but there were deadly tolls from the protests. And the measures to release or to decarcerate people during the pandemic were largely ineffective because they excluded drug offenses. So this narrative that we consider drug offenses to be so grave that we exclude them from being decarcerated even in the midst of a global catastrophe like the pandemic. Then lastly, some avenues for reform. I think this is a perfect opportunity, having the Vice Minister of Colombia here, to present some reforms that are happening in Colombia with regards to alternatives to incarceration. And I'm sure that it'll be an interesting process for other countries to look at. The Colombian government has adopted a law that allows for women who have caretaker responsibilities and that were involved in low-level offenses due to their caretaking responsibilities to serve their prison sentence outside of prison through what is called a public utility service. The law was adopted on International Women's Day just a few days ago, and the regulatory framework is being drafted as we speak. So it'll be a very interesting process for the region and for other countries to look at, to see how it works and how we can implement different measures that are not within prison settings. I think I'll leave it for that, but before that, just two notes. One is that both myself and my colleague back there, Luis Felipe, has some books to anyone who's interested. And in any case, these reports are up in the website of the SET. You type in drogasyderecho.org, and then you can download them. You can reach out to me if you want me to write the website. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I'm pretty sure that there's going to be a lot of questions afterwards. Well, our last intervention today is by Ernesto Cortés. Ernesto Cortés is an activist from Costa Rica. He is an executive director of the Costa Rican Association of Drug Studies and Intervention, member of the Costa Rican Association of Families of Incarcerated People, and Secretariat of the Latin American Network of People with Drug Landlords. He has a degree in social anthropology from the Universidad de Costa Rica, master's degree in criminology from the Universidad de Cooperación Internacional, and another master's degree in mental health. He is currently the vice chair of the New York NGO Committee on Drugs, researcher at the Research Collective on Drugs and Law, and professor of anthropology at the Universidad de Costa Rica. Welcome.
Hello. I wanted to start saying that I'm here representing my mother. This is important because my brother is still deprived of liberty. He went to prison for 4 years. His sentence was for 8 years. That's the minimum sentence in Costa Rica for any drug offense. Doesn't matter if you sell a joint or a kilo of any drug. It's 8 years minimum. He got 8 years. He got a probation, so he's at home. Has to sign every day. But I'm saying that because my mother is the one that is advocating at this network and the organization, the local organization in Costa Rica that I'll show you a little bit. And most of them are women. You know, in fact, we made a protest last year because COVID things were not out of prison still. So we went to protest in front of the Ministry of Justice, and I was the only adult man between 50 people that was there. There were some children, men. But all of them are women. So that's why this network is called International Network of Women's and Families of People of Incarcerated People deprived of liberty, because most of them are women, and that's an important issue to show. So this network organization in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Spanish region are united to fight for the respect of human persons deprived of liberty. That's the term we use in Spanish. It's incarcerated population in general, and their families. Also, each our local context has its particularity. We have experienced similar difficulties, regardless of language, culture, country, or religion. The organizations we recognize accompany each other from distance to support each other in the face of the impact of incarceration produced in the liberty of their life of our family members. So these are the organizations at the moment, in Mexico, Spain, Brazil, Argentina, El Salvador, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Ecuador. And I wanted to show because the Costa Rican organization is called Familia Penitenciaria Unida. It's like United Penitentiary Family. I'm the only man also in the organization. That's an important issue. And that's why I recall again that it's my mother, the one that should be there. I'm presenting for her because I'm also coming as part of a network of people who use drugs. I'm more a drug user activist, but I've been working also as a family of an incarcerated person that is my brother, and he was incarcerated for drug offense. So it's important to talk about this relation of gender in prison. One of the things, I didn't know if you said it, but most of the women incarcerated in Latin America are for drug offenses. So in Costa Rica, nearly 70 to 80% of women incarcerated are for drug offenses. There's some prisons. I remember the study that Luciana in Argentina did. In some prisons near the border with Bolivia, for example, that 100% of the women incarcerated were for drug offenses. Many of them non-Argentinians, Bolivians trafficking in small amounts. So it's important to take into account the gender issue for women incarcerated, but also on the family issues. I went to prison many times to take food or clothes or anything to my brother, or going to visit him. Most of the people visiting the incarcerated population are also women. So it's also an issue how women are treated in these spaces, because they get deprived or they get harassed and they get a lot of violence. Regarding to that, we did a small research in Costa Rica. We interviewed 26 women. We found out that a lot of them had problems with police, mainly women police that frisked them or searched them. How they touched them, how they had to show if they had this visita conjugal, the conjugal visit. Sometimes they had to put down their pants and show if they had menstruation. And they were bullied. If they something like that. At the point, it gets to a harass and a human rights violation. So also this figure is always replaced by another woman who takes charge of their family and imprisoning women. So at the end, incarcerated women, or women with families incarcerated, have a double charge on what they have to do and what they have to get in front of. So women relatives are torture prevention agents. So what we have found also is we can help to monitor, what's happening inside prisons. We're the first contact, for example, for these mechanisms for torture prevention, for example. They can call us and ask what happened. In fact, it happens a lot. During the pandemic, for example, my brother and some of his colleagues inside prison reported a raid by police. They were gassed. They found like 16 gas tanks inside a small place like this. So there was a demand made, and it was made by families of incarcerated people because inside they cannot even do that. So we seek to consolidate the idea of family members as relevant actors in the discussion about the prison reality and how to account for the need of implement social policies and to aim to alleviating the impact of prison in our life. Regional work in case our internal work, and local actions reinforce international work. So it's a synergy where you try to work, it's in a synergy and try to understand and see that most of the incarcerated population in Latin America suffer a similar situation, and we as family members of these people can help to point that out. So the general objectives of our organization, is to promote collaboration between members countries, and DPL is the incarcerated population, it's in Spanish, and family and women organizations. To strengthen our organization locally with a link with state and other actors regarding the form of incidents and claim or complaint incidents, more advocacy, and contribute to the improvement of living conditions and strengthening of the human rights of incarcerated population under families. So we have our allies. It had helped us to have a meeting in Bogota last year in October. I wasn't there. My mother was the one who was in that meeting. So we have WALA, that is the Washington office in Latin America. NAPES, that is Niños y Niñas, Adolescentes. How do you translate that? It's children with incarcerated family members, something like that. So this is a regional organization. It's based in Argentina. And Church World Service. So this organization funded these meeting that came out with the principles of Bogota, los principios de Bogota. So it's a long document, a 14 pages document. I'm not going to present. I'm just going to present several principles of the document. The document is going to be translated to Spanish. It's already running. The network is still coming up. It's still building up. It's a really new network. So we still have only like a Facebook page. Or an Instagram, but we're trying to build it up and see how we can work it together. That's at the end. These principles, what we talk is about equity and non-discrimination, healthcare. I think Isabel showed very well what's happening in our prisons and the amount of incarcerated and overpopulation. The rights of protection of the family bond. It's sometimes really hard to visit your family member inside or to access information inside. Or to access information, for example, I will tell a little bit about the story of my brother. My brother went to 4 different prisons in Costa Rica. The first prison he got really bad. He tried to commit suicide, so he went to a mental hospital. That was much better than prison, in fact. After that, he got into another prison. He was on pre-trial detention for 2 years. So after these 2 years, he got a sentence and went to another prison where he tried to understand how it worked. And to get probation, for example, he had to have some curses, like addiction curses or general issues. He just got any curse he could get. He also started studying. He went to Narcotic Anonymous. He went to everything he could find because he understood how the system worked. So at that point, he saw that all this, to finish this curses, he had to go to another prison. There were more advanced, that had more open issues to go. So we applied. We had to help him outside. So I went to the Ministry of Justice constantly to make this and send this paper, and calling him all the time. So at the end, he could get to this, and he had finished for 4 years incarcerated. He still have to go 4 more years, or at least 3 more years, signing every Thursday at a probation office. So access to justice, definitely, it's really hard to understand how the system works. Right to privacy and searches, as I said, mainly for women, and gender and diversity perspective. In Costa Rica, there's still some issues. For example, trans women can go to women prisons, but it depends on the judge and how it works. So in conclusion, conclusiones, it is urgent to know the human rights of the private of liberty and their family, of people in incarcerated population, strengthening women with relatives in prison needs procedures, psychological, social, and legal help, mainly legal help. No, we're in a WhatsApp group. It's 113 person, mainly women for sure. No, and the questions you see in this chat group sometimes are really simple. You know, where to call. My brother is in this prison. You know, what can he do to do this? So all the other women are answering, trying to like. They saw a shoe. You know, they take a picture of a shoe. Can I send him this shoe? And say, no, that's a big shoe. Or it's a shampoo bottle. No, that's a big shampoo bottle because they'll have all these restrictions on what you can put in, on what you can send. To provide countries' special ministry of justice with the importance of respecting the human rights of women, relatives of incarcerated population, recommend to international mechanisms for the prevention of torture to carry out studies, taking into account family members of incarcerated population. In fact, in Costa Rica, the mechanism for torture prevention made a study in 2018. This is the moment that this study hasn't been presented publicly. And make international organizations such as CICAD is Inter-American Commission on Drug Abuse, or something like that. That's why we're here also. No, this is another international United Nations, the CND, to put it out. And a very important situation. Though I think that's the most important point, and that's why I was gracious to be invited in this event. I think criminal justice and mainly incarcerated population for drug offenses is a key component. And as Isabel talked about alternatives to incarceration or proportionality in sentencing, in fact, something that we are pushing in Costa Rica, it's a bill to reduce penalties from 8 years to 3 years for minor offenses or drug-related minor offenses if the person, mainly women, you know, has several conditions, if she has children or is in line of poverty or has drug addiction, you know, because at the end, it doesn't matter, the penalties are so high, you know, that you always go to prison and you always get pre-trial. So I stop by that and thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. Now we have, luckily we have like almost 20 minutes for a Q&A session. So if there are any burning questions, raise your hand. We can start with the Q&A. Is there any question in the audience?
Hello, thank you very much. This is Anton from ABG in Spain. My question goes to Pilar, to Pedro. I was interested in knowing what is the relationship from your organization with the prisons institution in Spain? Is there a good relationship with it? How does it work?
Okay, yes, we have a very close relationship with the penitentiary institutions since in order to do our reports, we need to get in prisons freely, to get contact with people in prison, people with addictions. So we need their help. Without this help, it would be impossible to get to these people. This is not the first time we count on their support. We found previously to this report, we did another one in 2008, and we counted on them from the very first time, the very first moment until the end. So yes, we keep a very close relationship with them.
Hi, my name is Abid Mahmood. I'm from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I have two questions. First to you, both of you actually, and also Ernesto and Pedro, that in your study and work, that whether you have looked at the people of African descent, that what is the impact of this process? Because a few years back, High Commissioner produced a report because we know that racism and law enforcement on this issue and this aspect also we highlighted. So whether you have any study or statistics, particularly on that category of people. Second question for Isabel, for you, that you mentioned about the pre-trial detention, that this huge pre-trial detention, and in your discussion or study, how you're relating this with the SDG 16, particularly in SDG 16.1, is talking about reducing the pretrial detention. If government can't do that now, we have just only 7 years to go to meet the SDG goal. So whether any link you have made with regard to SDG and the prison system?
Yeah, sure. So with regards to the first question, the studies carried out by the SED did not have the component of disaggregated data on people of African descent. And I'm not sure if the country's data comes with that disaggregation. And I know that the Colombian one doesn't. But I can see that the colleagues from Brazil are here, and perhaps they do. I don't know if I'm calling you on the spot, Marangelica, but I think they're very well positioned to answer this question, at least for the case of Brazil. Yeah. And then on the second question on the SDG, well, these studies were carried out 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and I think back then, these links of the drug policy agenda to the sustainable development agenda were not there. I think they're not there now either that much. So no, there was no link with this SDG 16.
Well, in our report, we haven't disseminated the nationalities, for the nationalities, yes, for us, from a very point of view of gender perspective, but we include the groups in the same categories of people who come from a very vulnerable environments. So we find that they have the same reason, same rights, and same situation as people from other nationalities.
Do you want to? Yeah. Do you want to answer? Please.
I'm sorry,
I-
I was okay. I didn't understand
The question was about the people of African descent in prisons.
Yeah, in Brazil?
Yeah.
In Brazil, about between women, 7% of the population and the prison and respond to laws, the drug law, and maybe 55% are black women, and between the men, 30% of the men are responsible for the drug law, and 78% is black.
78.
Yeah. And the black people in Brazil is about 53% of the total population.
Thank you very much. Is there any other question, comment, or anything? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentations. I have just a thought that I wanted to share with you that came to my mind connecting the Pedro's presentation and Ernesto's presentation, because I find that this the idea around your organization is really wonderful to organize or connect women with families and with a relative impression. And also, I remember that when the report that Pedro presented was the presentation in Madrid, that you mentioned that women incarcerated are usually more lonely. They receive less visits than men. So there's also this situation, and I just thought that it would be kind of somehow beautiful to connect with the two issues, like being a woman with a relative incarcerated and the connection with the loneliness of women inside prisons. And I don't know if you have thoughts about this. This is the common thing.
I wish I could have time to speak about differences between men and women inside prison, because as you may know, we found really a lot of differences. To begin with, at least the buildings. Just to begin with, buildings are very much masculinized, masculinized, and women have not the same resources as men in these places. They don't have specialized resources for them, for the women. There are resources only for men, not only for women, and normally they are obligated to accept the resources, programs, and all these things, programs made for men, by men for men. So it is a question that we think is very important to end with. And to begin building centers, penitentiary centers only for women, we have, obviously, but not enough. And to try to have enough programs specialized for women today. So this is a big problem in Spain from a very personal point of view.
I want to say I don't really answer for that, but I think it's, as I said, it's really important to understand what the difference. Even though there's much more men incarcerated than women, there was like this group, a working group where Isabel was part of, women incarcerated for drug offenses in Latin America, helped by Walla, no? Corina was here, I don't know where she went. Yes, okay, I left her. It's sad because she was coordinated that group. And it was interesting because we could do some interviews inside Costa Rican prisons and Colombian prisons and Mexican prisons. And I will never forget this woman saying, the first call I have to make in the morning, it's at 6 a.m. to ask my daughter if she's going to school. You know? Later that day, I have to call her to teach her how to cook rice. You know? And all these issues, she still has to do her motherly work, you know, being in prison. When men don't have to do that. And men get more visits. In fact, in Costa Rica, there's only one prison for women in the capital. So if you want to visit, you have to travel the whole country. So definitely there's less rights for women or incarcerated women. And as I said, many of the prisons are built for men. In fact, there's a new prison in Costa Rica built for women. The overpopulation of men was so high that they just put men inside this prison. And women are also living in the same conditions. So definitely it's an issue to take into account. And also I think gender diversity is also important to put into account. You know, that is even less spoken around prisons.
If you connect to ideas, for example, when I started saying that we had explored about 1,086 people, 834 men and 247 women, this is a percentage that make a difference. If you connect this to the needs, to the special needs of women, then you can find that there is a big difference between the treatment to the men to the women. She, for example, don't have the problem of aggressiveness, and buildings nowadays are prepared for this aggressiveness, very typical in men. They don't have this problem of aggressiveness. They could have prisons, buildings down for them, especially without these sort of measures, security measures, for example.
Thank you very much. Fortunately, we are running out of time, but maybe we have a few minutes more for last question there.
Hello. Good afternoon. Marcos Alexandra from the Council of Europe Computer Group. My question is, do you observe in countries of Latin America and in Spain such a phenomenon as informal hierarchies, subcultures, and in how far do they influence the decision of people with substance use disorder to start treatment in prison, if there is a link or no? And if you have this kind of phenomenon, how are national administrative penitentiaries, how are you combating, fighting this kind of subcultures inside prison?
Can we do that for you?
I could say quickly in Costa Rica what happens. There's definitely hierarchies. In fact, the one that runs the place is called it has the figure map. And he has his dogs and Saiyajines that make their dirty work. Police officers know that, and they need to do that. They need to have these people inside because they cannot control it. So it's known everywhere. There's no drug treatment at all. There's no prison that has drug treatment at all.
No drug treatment.
Not at all. No, you don't have any drug treatment. And most of Latin America, there's no drug treatment at all inside prisons. And in fact, most of these cachudos are the ones that sell the drugs. So if you want to have a good relationship with him, you have to buy drugs. And these drugs, my mother used to spend like $100 a month, or less a week, to send to my brother so he could buy food also because food is crap. They call it vomit inside the prison. So he had to buy chicken, cannabis, cocaine, whatever he had to buy, rent a phone that he didn't have access to, and the leader of the space was the one in charge of that.
And in Spain, I couldn't give you an official answer or an answer from our report, but obviously there are people of any types, and obviously there are drugs in prison. So,
Okay, so I think we are on time now. So thank you very much again for joining us today. Have a good night.